Good morning. Welcome again to the Northwood University Freedom Seminar. This morning's speaker is one of the most articulate defenders of the free enterprise system and of individual liberty that I am personally familiar with, and we are very fortunate to have him at Northwood University on the faculty. Richard Ebeling is professor of economics at Northwood University and formerly president of the Foundation of Economic Education, and the Ludwig von Mises Professor of Economics at Hillsdale College in Hillsdale, Michigan, where he served as Vice President of Academic Affairs for the Future of Freedom Foundation. While serving as Vice President for the Future of Freedom Foundation, Professor Ebeling co-edited and contributed to 5 books published by the Foundation, and he wrote a monthly article and book review for the publication Freedom Daily. His articles have also appeared in the Freeman, Reason, Libertarian Review, Critical Review, and many other journals. He frequently is a guest on radio and television, where his views are highly respected, and he is here today to teach us about the philosophy of freedom and free markets. So would you please help me welcome Dr. Richard Ebeling.
Thank you. Okay, we on? We on? Okay. Well, good morning. Gluttons for punishment. I see some faces I know in my classes. You came back here for more? Well, okay, it's okay. Anyway, how do I want to begin? Well, I wanted to tell you a story. Not too long ago, a paraplegic who is a political conservative rolled himself in his wheelchair into a bar. And he positions himself next to a table. And the bartender comes over and asks him, what would you like to have to drink? And he said, well, what I would like to have is I would like to have a glass of wine. So the bartender comes and brings the glass of wine. And the conservative looks over into the corner of the room and says to the bartender, isn't that Jesus Christ? And the bartender says, yes, that's Jesus sitting there. Well, would you please take a glass of wine over to Jesus and tell him it's on me? And then a libertarian came into the bar. And the libertarian has a hunchback on his shoulder, and his spine is twisted, and he's on crutches, and he hobbles into the bar, and he sits at a table as well. And the bartender comes over, and he asks him what he wants, and he says, well, I think I'll have a glass of beer. The bartender brings the beer. The libertarian looks over in the corner and says to the bartender, isn't that Jesus Christ? The bartender says, yes, that is Jesus. Well, you send a glass of beer over to Jesus and tell him it's on me. And then finally a liberal Democrat hobbles in, also on crutches, with just a little cast on his leg. And he comes over to a table, and the bartender asks him what he wants, and he says, I'll have a shot of whiskey. And the bartender comes back with the whiskey, and the liberal Democrat looks over at the corner of the room and says, isn't that Jesus? The bartender says, yes, it is Jesus. Well, you take a shot of whiskey over and tell Jesus it's on me. After a while, Jesus gets up, and he comes over to the badly paralyzed conservative in the wheelchair, and he touches him, and he says, for your kindness and thoughtfulness, I touch you and you are healed. And suddenly all the paralysis is gone from the conservative's body. And he jumps up and he shouts and he dances out of the bar. Hallelujah, praise the Lord. And he goes over to the libertarian and he touches him. And he says, for your thoughtfulness and kindness, I touch you and you are healed. And the hump on the libertarian's back is gone, and his spine is straightened, and the libertarian jumps for joy and drops his crutches. Hallelujah, praise the Lord, as he runs out of the bar. And then he goes up to the liberal Democrat, and he's just about to touch him and saying, for your kindness and thoughtfulness. And the liberal Democrat says, don't touch me, I'm on government disability. I'm on government disability. Pay attention. There's going to be a test. Okay. Oh, all right. Oh, there isn't going to be a test. Oh, that's different. Okay. Anyway, I just thought that would somehow be appropriate for the theme of this lecture. Okay, what I'm supposed to talk about, what I wanted to present, was how do we defend individual liberty? What is the meaning of individual liberty? In this context, how shall we organize human relationships in society? And in that situation, what is the role, function, and duty of government? And so this is going to be sort of an analysis of basically two conceptions of how to defend or justify or appreciate the meaning of freedom and the rights of the individual, how men shall associate in society, and the role of government in this context. I think the best way to begin with this is to remind ourselves, what is freedom's opposite? What is freedom's opposite? And freedom's opposite is slavery. Now, what is a slave? Some men reduced to being the property of others. You don't own yourself. You are like a tool, an implement, an appendage to someone else and his goals, his purposes, his designs. You are nothing more than like the tool that a person picks up and uses as a screwdriver or a hammer, and when he's finished it, he just sets it aside. The slave has no life of his own, no goals of his own, no actions of his own, no purposes of his own, other than those given to him by the master who directs him to act in certain ways. Slaves, therefore, are the means to other men's ends. They are denied the right to be ends in themselves. That doesn't mean that historically slaves were not taken care of by their masters. Yes, they often were. The masters would give food to the slaves. The masters would give shelter to the slaves. The master would give clothing and medical attention to the slaves. But while there may have been some individual slave masters who had a sense of empathy, sentiment, sympathy, a touch of humanity, and did it out of some goodness towards a fellow human being who happened to be their slave. But historically, most instances, the reason the slave owner fed the slave, gave him shelter, a roof over his head, clothing on his body, gave medical attention, is that what good is your property if it no longer is functional to perform a duty to which you want to assign it? Why do you give your car a tune-up periodically? Do an oil change. If you notice that maybe there's a leak in the roof of your house, why do you repair it? Because if you don't, the car will not run properly, and if you don't change the oil, the engine might eventually seize up, and then you're going to have the cost of replacing this vehicle sooner than you want it to. If you don't repair that little leak in the roof, it could get worse, and the roof could cave in, and then where do you live? So you maintain your property as a means of having the ability to serve your ends. Transportation to get around and giving tune-ups and oil changes in your car, rotating the tires, and repairing a leak in the roof, or if there seems to be a crack that might threaten the foundation, you try to repair it. Because your concern with it is not because of the car per se or the house per se, but because it is yours to use, and unless you maintain them in good working order, they cannot provide the services and functions for which you want a car or a house. That's why most slave masters took care of their slaves. Not out of benevolence, charity, generosity, empathy, sympathy, humanity for another human being, but because they're your property. And if you don't maintain the slave, you feed him, you clothe him, you keep him healthy, how's he going to go out and do the work that you want to direct him to do? The slave is merely a means to the master's end. And you maintain the slave in good working order the same way you do your car or your home. I just want to mention as an aside here, you know, in the particular American historical circumstance, race became dependent upon, slavery became dependent upon race. The accident of history resulted at that time, slaves were captured in Africa and brought to the Americas, both North America and South America. But the fact is, slavery is one of the oldest institutions of human association, and if I can put it this way, has been an equal opportunity institution. In other words, it has not mattered who you were, what you looked like, to be possibly conquered and enslaved. In other words, historically, slavery has nothing to do with race. In the ancient world, you had the Greek city-states like Athens and Sparta and others, and they would fight with each other. And if one city-state conquered another, they not only seized the land, the resources, the cattle, anyone that they didn't kill, they could make their slaves. So Greeks enslaved Greeks. When the Romans built their empire a few centuries later and then had an empire encompassing much of Central, Western, Southern Europe, the Mediterranean, the Middle East, part of North Africa, as they conquered these vast areas of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, they enslaved many of their conquered peoples, literally made them slaves. But then again, they didn't care. Europeans were enslaved by other Europeans. The Romans enslaved other Europeans. They enslaved Arabs in the Middle East. They enslaved some Arabs and black Africans in those parts of North Africa. They didn't care. And this has been the case all over the world. Asians have enslaved Asians. The Aztecs and the Incas of ancient America before, before Christopher Columbus, we have those historical records. Aztecs and Incas would just enslave other of these native tribes in America when they had conquered them and needed work to be done. So slavery historically has nothing to do with race. It's the idea of the conqueror deciding, should I kill him or should I make him my slave to make him do work that I would otherwise have to do for myself? And that's been the only base of it. It's the accident of the historical circumstances at that moment that added or introduced or incorporated the fact that the slave was of a different racial color than the slave master. But that was an accident of history. Slavery has nothing to do with race per se. Now, slavery is premised on the use of force and its threat. It must, because who would voluntarily be a slave? To be at the bidding of the master, particularly when your own town or village or community would have been conquered and you had seen your family members and other community members killed and you and the others put in chains and now told what to do. Why, if slavery was voluntary, why would you need the chains? The very notion of slavery is based on force and its threat. Do my bidding. Do what I tell you. You work here. You do that. You show up at this time. You sleep now. You wake up. You go to work as I command. All of that is based upon the threat or the use of force. What? To make the slave do what he's told when the master wants it done, and to see that he does not attempt to escape, or if he does attempt to escape, that the escape is not made good on. Now, slavery existed throughout human history. It only began to be significantly challenged over time in the West under the influence of Judaism and Christianity. There has always been people through the ages who said, oh, philosophically, shouldn't all men, be free, But this was just pipe dreams. It did not become an actual movement for liberty for all men until the 18th century, the 1700s, particularly the second half of the 18th century, where there arose an anti-slave movement in Great Britain, deeply influenced by men who held their religious faith very strongly. A fellow named William Wilberforce, for example. There's a movie about him. It's called Amazing Grace, about his life to bring slavery to an end in Britain in the 18th and early 19th centuries. And they formed an anti-slavery league. They elected people to the British Parliament. They wrote pamphlets. They published books. They had public debates and arguments. They spoke from the pulpit. And what did they say? There's only one God in heaven, and he's the Lord of all of us. We are all his children made in his image. And what is this arrogance, this presumption for another human being, another child of God, to claim the right to lord over, to be master of another, when we are all equal in the eyes of God and there's only one master and he resides in heaven? They were deeply devoted to their religious faith and this concept. And as a consequence, in the 1790s, they were able to end slavery in Great Britain, that is, those islands off the coast of Europe, but not the British Empire. But that did come in 1832, 1834, where the anti-slavery movement became strong enough in Great Britain that they passed an act of Parliament and it abolished slavery throughout the British Empire. That already was enveloping a good part of the world at that time. And that became the inspiration for the end of slavery and the model of ending slavery in the rest of, quote, the modern or civilized world, as it was called. In the United States case, of course, it took a tragic civil war. Over 600,000 people died in the 4-year American Civil War between the North and the South. But slavery formally ended in the Americas in the late 1890s when the Empress of Brazil, they used to have an empress, a monarchy, the Empress of Brazil signed a proclamation ending slavery in Brazil. Now, unfortunately, slavery still does exist in some parts of the world. No country formally is based upon the institution of slavery, but tacitly, de facto, as they say, slavery still exists. It exists in certain Arab countries, in Mauritania in West Africa, in Malai and Niger and other parts of North Africa. And there are slave traders. It has existed in Sudan. If you follow any news, Sudan has had a civil war for 20 years. In the north are the Islamic Arabs. In the south are Christian and pagan black Africans. Recently, the South Sudan, last year, broke away. United Nations brokered a separation. So South Sudan, where it's predominantly black African and Christian or pagan, broke away as a separate country. But the Arabs, through most of this civil war, would not only plunder and destroy villages of those who opposed their rule out of the capital of Khartoum, but they would enslave people and sell them. Where? In places like Mauritania in Western Africa. And there is still an anti-slavery league headquartered in Great Britain, in London. And they do what they did back when slavery dominated many of these areas of the world 150, 200 years ago. And that is raise money and go out and buy the freedom of slaves. So that is the opposite of freedom, to be the property of another. Now there's an essential theory of rights that has grown up in the West. And this is called natural rights theory, freedom as self-ownership. The opposite of slavery is for each man to own himself, a gift from either God or nature, depending upon the advocate's philosophical perspective. This is the tradition of which the American experiment of self-government has come. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And as the Founding Fathers in the Declaration of Independence went on, men form governments to secure these rights. And after petition and attempted redress, governments that are abridging or violating these rights cannot be made to reform themselves. It is the legitimate duty of the citizenry to overthrow that government and to form a new government to secure those freedoms. That was the Founding Fathers' rationale of declaring independence from the British Empire and then fighting a war against the greatest army in the world at that time, luckily successfully. Now, where did that come from? Well, in this modern period, it came greatly inspired by a British philosopher named John Locke, who in the 1620s wrote 2 treatises on government. And he laid it out as a fundamental, self-evident truth that each man has a certain natural right given to him by nature and God and reinforced by his reason. And what are those natural rights? Each individual has a right to his life, his liberty, and his honestly acquired property. The free man is both an end in himself and the means to his own ends. What does that mean? To be an end in yourself. You set your goals. You set your purposes. You direct your life. You determine what is important, what is of value to you, what meaning you want to give to your life. And you use your abilities, your mental abilities, your physical abilities to attempt to achieve the goals, the purposes that will give value, meaning, significance, success to your life as you define it. That means that the individual is self-owning. You own yourself. Is that not the opposite of the slave? The slave master says, you do not own yourself. You are mine, for me to do with as I choose. The free man says, I own myself. I own myself either because God has given me this life and only he can command or take it away, or my reason about the nature of man. What my reason tells me is essential for me to be a prospering, surviving human being defines me as self-owning. But to be self-owning means you may not do anything to me. You may not touch me. You may not harm me. You may command me without my consent. I often tell in my classes, I know I have a few students here who have taken me before, and when I discuss this, I always use this very stark example, and that is, why are we most shocked, or we should be most shocked, by the human violation known as rape? Because what is the most intimate violation of another's self-ownership of themselves than the act of rape? Who are you to invade another? Because you own yourself. You may not touch me. You may not do anything to me or with me without my consent. Self-ownership and the right to property in the land and resources. Well, Locke, for example, argued if each man has a right to his life, you're not going to live very long unless you may use the resources of the world around you to be able to sustain your life. Now, his philosophy was of self-appropriation or free exchange. What is first appropriation? What does first appropriation mean? Well, you come to virgin land that is unclaimed, unsettled, undeveloped land by any other person, and you clear the field, you lay the farrows, you plant the seeds, you tend and irrigate the crop as it's growing, and then it reaches its maturity, and you harvest it, and the crop belongs to you. You've mixed, as Locke says, your mental and your physical labor. It's your physical labor that did the digging and the caring and the harvesting. It's your mental labor that imagined, created the design, the idea of the farm and the growing and how to properly watch over the crop and the procedure to harvest it. So you've used your mental and your physical labor. And it is naturally yours. It may not be taken away from you. It is your natural property. And what if there is no unclaimed, unused resources and raw materials? How shall a man survive? And John Locke argued, through exchange, because no matter how much other resources may already be in the property of others, there is always one property that can be not claimed that you don't have access to, and that is yourself. And therefore, what you can do is you can sell the products of your labor, your mental and your physical abilities, for what others have that you desire. I'm a professor at Northwood University. I don't own coffee fields in Brazil, though I like to drink coffee. I don't own the machinery that can grind lenses to make glasses, though I need and wear a pair of glasses. I don't have the machinery and the raw materials to make my clothes, yet I wear clothes. And how do I do so? Because I sell those services that property which I have, which may not be separated from me. I can sell the results of this labor as a professor. I sell my services to Northwood University. They pay me a salary for services rendered. And I proceed to go out in the marketplace and buy all the other goods and services I desire that others are offering for sale with the resources of various types that they do have use and control and ownership of. This notion of our natural rights to our life, liberty, and honestly acquired property involves respecting the rights to life, liberty, and property in all social and economic interactions. This notion of liberty suggests that if each individual has this natural right to his own life, his own liberty, his own honestly acquired property, then it falls upon each and every one of us to respect it, to not violate it, and to deal with others only on the basis of mutual agreement and voluntary exchange. I may not violate you, just as I would not want you to violate me. Now, what is the role of government in this setting? To secure each individual's rights from violence and fraud. That's the conception that is in the Founding Fathers' Declaration of Independence. It's the underlying philosophic principle that came to be embedded in the Constitution of the United States. Now, the Constitution of the United States is not very flowery or waxing eloquent on political philosophy. In fact, except for the preamble about the general welfare and tranquility, there's no philosophical statement. The Constitution is basically an organizational chart that tells each branch of the newly established government what its responsibilities and duties are. This is the job of the president as the executive. This is the job of the Congress as the legislative branch. This is the job of the courts as the judicial branch. And these are the duties and responsibilities you have and none other. And in fact, if you read the Constitution, and if you understand it as a document of enumerated and limited responsibilities, duties, and functions, there is nothing in that Constitution, as written, that suggests the government should supply Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, public housing, unemployment insurance, mandated regulations and controls over the workplace, or. Indeed, one could argue that if you read the Constitution and the words in it, perhaps up to 90% of what government does today in American society is not legitimate or allowed under that actual reading of the enumerated and limited responsibilities of the federal government. The other approach towards liberty is what's called utilitarianism. It is the idea that we judge institutions or actions or outcomes by their effectiveness in enabling us to achieve desired goals. Freedom as a means to human ends. Man wishes to improve his circumstances and evaluates any and all means in terms of ability to further his goals. Okay? I have a cup of coffee. How do I evaluate this as a means to an end? Does it quench my thirst? Does it give a pleasant taste in my mouth? Does it make me feel comfortable, or with some caffeine, does it help to keep me alert? So I evaluate the efficacy, the usefulness, the value of the means in relation to the ends, purposes, or goals that it helps me attain or advance. Now, in society, we need the assistance of others. The sole isolated producer, the Robinson Crusoe alone on his island, having been shipwrecked, cannot attain or do very much. You're limited to your knowledge, your skills, your strength, and the resources immediately under your disposal. The advantage of human cooperation is that we can take advantage of what other people know, what other people can do, the resources, skills, abilities that they have in their capacity that we do not. Human cooperation, therefore, becomes the means by which man pursues the vast majority of his ends, since his own mental and physical abilities are too limited to achieve all of his purposes. So how shall men cooperate? Okay? How shall men cooperate? From this utilitarian point of view, we judge social institutions by their greater or less capacity to further each individual's goal through human cooperation. Does this social arrangement, does this social institution, does this form of human relationship advance and further the individual's ability to attain the goals and purposes he has in mind better, more efficacious, more successfully than other human institutional arrangements? And not just from the perspective of some immediate outcome, but in the long run. What that's getting at is that, when it said honesty is the best policy, for instance, we all know that we can get away with maybe getting something or doing something that we'd like if we tell a lie. It could be a little lie or a big lie. But we often can get away with something that we'd like to do right in the here and now if we tell a lie, if we deceive, if we defraud someone else. But does that mean that that is a successful policy taking the long run? Well, let's suppose you lie and cheat, and you gain what you want, but at someone else's expense, and they discover that you have lied and cheated them out of something that you wanted from them. And you do it to another person, and they find out what kind of person you are. And you do it again, and that third person finds out what kind of person you are. You're a liar, a deceiver, a defrauder, a cheat. You may be able to get away with this 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, but eventually, as people wise up to what you are like, guess what? They refuse to associate with you. They refuse to cooperate with you. They refuse to have any dealings with you, because they know that any relationship they enter into with you is going to be one in which you are going to try to lie, cheat, deceive, and manipulate them. And you know what? They start having dealings with you. And the cumulative effect is that now you will be worse off, because no one will associate with you, or under only the most narrow and strict terms, because they're afraid of what you're like as a person. And in the long run, you'll be made worse off for that. So honesty is the best policy from the point of view of the long-run rule of what is best serving for each individual. Yeah, I could get away with stealing the hotel towel and taking it home. But the long run is that I respect each person's property, they respect my property, and as we have confidence and trust in each other's trustworthiness in these relationships, we more freely feel comfortable and are willing to enter into mutually beneficial relationships and associations with each other. It is the set of long-run rules to assure this human cooperation. And therefore, we judge private property. What is its long-run benefit to human association? We judge market relationships on their long-run benefit to human betterment, and so on. And what is the role of government? Is to recognize and enforce those social rules and institutions that assist in securing human cooperation. So government's role, again, is to protect property, to enforce contract. And justice is supposed to be blind. Justice is supposed to be blind. Justice stands there with one hand scales and the other hand a sword, right? The goddess of justice that you often see the statue in front of courthouses. And what is the scale for? To weigh the evidence evenly and impartially. And a sword of justice. The innocent shall be let free, and the guilty will be given the reward, the punishment that fits the crime. And she's blind. She has the blindfold over her eyes, so that there'll be no peeking to give privilege, favor, special benefit to some at the expense of others. Law shall be imposed and enforced impartially with fair justice for all. The rule of law, not the rule of peeking, rule of men. Who's my friend and who's not? Okay. The fact is that we need other people's association, and partly this is because we use resources. But the problem is that other men, as a restraint on an individual's actions and use of scarce resources to his end. I have goals, you have goals. Often your goals and my goals require the use of similar resources. The problem is resources are scarce. And what does that mean? It just means that the means at our disposal are less in their quantities or qualities than the goals and purposes we have for them. Well, how shall I get what I need when you'd like to have it too, or maybe you've already had it in your possession that I desire? One is to conquer and kill as the ancient means of eliminating competition of others. You don't have to worry about someone else wanting to drink from the same water hole, or to pick the same apples from a tree, or to kill a similar animal for meat if you have yourself killed your competitor. Slavery became a means for others to perform tasks the conqueror would have to perform. Instead of killing your enemy, you put him in those chains, and now you have him do work that you don't want to do or can't do, because either you don't have the talents or you don't have the time to do everything that you want. And this, of course, in our own modern era has led to the command economy as the system of control and planning based on the use of threat of force. The last 100 years has seen an array of such command economies. The Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, Communist China, And today, still in the world, places like North Korea, Cuba under the Castro brothers. The command economy is a system in which some have political control of the government and impose their will on the rest of the society. They direct them, they plan them, they tell them what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, for what purposes to produce, and how much of the produced output will then be distributed, provided to each individual in the society. Dr. Cox last night mentioned that he had traveled in the Soviet Union. So did I. In the early 1990s, I was doing consulting work on market reform and privatization there, as the Soviet Union was trying to reform itself before it just collapsed because it was unreformable, basically. There were only government stores. There were only government factories. There were only government department buildings. The government determined where you worked. Having already determined what education the government had planned for you. Would you be a professional? Will you be a skilled individual? Will you just be a bricklayer? All of this was decided by the government. The individual had only a very narrow range of options and choices. And then having decided what type of profession, occupation, or trade or experience in education you'll have, they would decide where you're going to work and at what. And that means they would assign you to a city. And if you're in a city, you need a place to live. So the government assigned you the part of the city that you had to live in the particular building that you would live in, and assigned you the particular apartment that you would live in. No choice in these matters. And you had to have in your internal passport, your documents, the address of where you were allowed to live and required to live, and from which you could not move without government permission. Totally planned and controlled by the government. The alternative to this is the contract society. Individuals associate on the basis of mutual consent and voluntary agreement. That is the society of freedom. You own yourself, I own myself. We are sovereigns, if you will. I am ruler of myself as you're ruler of yourself. And how do we associate? On mutual agreement and voluntary consent. If you do this for me, I will do that for you. Which, as Adam Smith said a long time ago in The Wealth of Nations, is the essence of every exchange. That is the meaning of a market economy. It is an economic system of contract, in which individuals associate for mutual benefit. If you make me the suit of clothes, I will prepare your dinner. If you make me a pair of glasses, I will grow the coffee beans that enable you to later on have a cup of coffee. All of this is based upon and reinforces the division of labor, which is more productive and better work through specialization of tasks. One is the butcher, one is the baker, one is the candlestick maker. Now, both the slave society and the market economy are based upon division of labor. But how do we decide who's going to do what work? And how, and where, and when, and for what purpose, and how much? Well, in the command economy, what gets done is limited to the knowledge possessed by the planners and the controllers who direct all the assigned tasks of others. It was a central planning agency in Moscow in the old Soviet Union days that set up a blueprint of a 5-year plan for the entire Soviet economy. What would be produced, how much would be produced, how it would be produced, what factories and industries would do the producing and the construction, all directed from the center. Now, clearly, since people do not have perfect and complete and full knowledge, each of us have limited and imperfect knowledge, then what got done and how it was done and where it was done and by whom and for what purposes was limited to what the handful of planners in the central planning agency in Moscow had the wisdom, knowledge, and experience and education to know and understand. The society was straitjacketed to the knowledge and abilities of a handful of minds. That compares to the market economy. It allows each individual to use his own knowledge and abilities as he considers best. Each of us, as we develop our knowledge, our experience, our abilities, know things that others in society do not. If you ask the question, where is the knowledge of the world? You could say something like, well, it resides in some giant library, such as the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., claimed to be, if not one of the largest libraries on the planet. Books on every subject in many, many languages, going back hundreds and hundreds of years, on miles, right? Miles of bookshelves. And you could say all the knowledge of the world resides in the Library of Congress, but that knowledge does not reside in any one book. That knowledge is divided among all the volumes on all the shelves on those miles and miles of bookcases in the Library of Congress. A little bit of the knowledge of the world in this volume, in this volume, in this volume. And that is the way it is in society as a whole. Where does the knowledge of the world reside? A little bit in your mind, a little bit in your mind, a little bit in your mind, a little bit in your mind. So how shall we take advantage and utilize, coordinate, integrate all of the knowledge of the world that is dispersed, divided, decentralized among all of our minds in the little bits that each of us have acquired through knowledge, education, experience, skill, and doing? And that is the idea of the economy. The invisible hand concept. Each individual improves himself by serving others. Each individual is free to use his own knowledge as he sees fit. But in the division of labor, if it's not by command but by consent, contract, then I can't get anything that you have that I desire other than with you consenting to give it to me of your own free will. That's the very notion of exchange. If you give me some of your marbles, I'll give you some of my jacks. Now, if I cannot steal from you, if I cannot kill you to get it, if I cannot defraud you, those are the rules of the game of a market economy. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness. That is no lying, deceiving, or defrauding. So we're talking about rules of conduct that go back far earlier than just the Declaration of Independence or John Locke. If I can't do these things to get what you have that I want, then how do I get it from you? By you being willing to give it up. And that requires for me to apply my knowledge, skills, and abilities to use what I can produce in a way that will offer you something that you're willing to take and trade. So I now have to apply my knowledge, my ability, my skills, my experience, my education to making things, goods and services in the market that I believe that you'd be willing to take and trade, that you value more highly than what you possess and would be willing to give up in exchange for me to have it. And that is the essence of a market economy. Okay? Individuals improve each other by serving others through a system of division of labor based upon voluntary exchange. Okay, in the market economy, individuals do not have to own and directly control land, resources, and labor to get what they want. Others use them to produce goods to sell in the market. Individuals place the private property under their ownership in the service of others. I don't own a coffee plantation in Brazil. I don't own the ships that transport the harvested coffee from South America to North America. I don't own the factories and the machinery where the raw coffee beans are crushed and transformed into coffee that goes into this cup, nor do I have the machines to make the cardboard cup or the plastic lids. Yet all of those who own those resources, raw materials, machines, tools, and equipment, and have the labor skills to know how to bring that all together, make this coffee available to me through this concept of how shall I use my knowledge and ability in a way that can earn me a living by making something that others will take and trade for what they have that I desire. That is how goods manufactured on the other side of the world get brought to the doorstep of American shoppers in their malls and stores in the U.S. by each person applying themselves to serve others as the means of acquiring the things that they desire. Under a command economy, the government is the monopoly producer, employer, supplier of everything produced in society. The individual is completely at the mercy of the political authority, the great tyranny. When the government owns all the means of production, land, labor, capital, resources, it determines what will be produced, how, where, when, and for what purpose. The government is the only employer. The government is the only supplier. When the government owns all the newspapers, the only thing in the newspapers is what the government wants in the newspapers. When the government runs and owns all of the movie theaters and the movie producing factories, the only movies made are the movies that the government wants people to see. When the government owns all the land and all the resources, then the only things built on land is what government wants to be constructed. So perhaps you have a religious faith, and there are the others who share your religious faith, and you'd like to have a place of worship, right? A church, a synagogue, a mosque, whatever your faith is, a Buddhist temple, whatever. But if the government owns all the resources and all the land, then what happens when the government says, sorry, our 5-year plan has higher priorities than assigning land and using resources to make you a place of worship? Whereas in the market economy, if you offer a price for a piece of land, it's yours. If you've outbid the next closest bidder. If you want to build whatever construction on it, including a house of worship, let's say, you hire a construction company. And if you offer them a fee that matches what other users of their construction services would be willing to pay, they build you your church or your mosque or your synagogue or your temple. Private property helps to protect and secure freedom. Private property enables people to have control of resources outside the command and influence of government. Thus, there exist areas of private life free of the government. When there's private property, you are not dependent, you are not beholden upon what the government chooses to give you, which may be essential for your life. You can operate outside of the government. That is the importance of private property. Now let's very briefly talk about how does this all fit in with democracy. Dr. Cox yesterday said that we confuse democracy and freedom. I happen to totally agree with him. So what is political freedom? Political freedom is the right to participate in the political process for selecting and electing those who will hold political office. Okay? That's what political freedom is. Instead of civil wars or violent revolutions or military coups d'etats, we hold elections. Democracy as an institutional rule of majority decision-making, but democracy does not tell what should be the powers and limits of government control over people's lives. Democracy is merely a mechanism for selecting who will hold political office and for what term, what period of time. It tells us nothing about what those people are supposed to do once they're in office. That's a matter of political philosophy. What do you consider the role, functions, duties, and responsibilities of government, and what not? Freedom in the market. Each individual makes his own choices independent of the direct choices of others. The market is more pluralistic. It satisfies a diversity of tastes and preferences of both minorities and majorities on a continuous basis. You go to the supermarket, you have your shopping cart. I buy this much breakfast cereal, I buy this much canned beans, I buy that much cheese, I buy these many dozen eggs, I buy that. And I fill my shopping cart up, and you're walking down the aisles too, and you're filling it with the goods that you want. Sometimes what you buy and what I buy in terms of what's in the cart may overlap, but a lot of times it doesn't. And even if there are similar goods in your cart and mine, the relative amounts may vary. And each of us goes to the checkout counter, pays for what we choose to buy based upon what we're willing to purchase in terms of the constraint of our income or other uses we could have for the money that we could spend. And we then go home with our purchases and use them for our individual desires, goals that we have in mind. Right? That's what it means by pluralistic. It serves many people's ends in many diverse ways, both majorities and minorities. I read economics books. Okay? I know it's hard to believe. Who would do that voluntarily? He must be a slave. He's forced by a master to read economics books. Oh, that's a professor. I forgot. Makes you read the economics. No, I read economics books. I hate to tell you this, Economics books are not mass reading for humanity. Most people like other kind of books, novels, detective stories, romances, whatever. Yeah. How to do books, is it cooking or handyman, how to do handiwork around the house, not economics books. But even though my taste is a minority taste in the world, in the society, my taste is satisfied. As long as there are enough people, no matter how small and limited their demand for something may be, as long as there are enough of them that they are willing and able to pay a price to sufficiently cover the costs of someone providing that type of book that I'm interested in reading, those books come on the market. So it is pluralistic, and it serves both minorities and majorities. Freedom in the political process. The individual cannot refuse to accept the government's decisions about the taxes he pays for the services provided. To change the government's spending and taxing policies, the individual must persuade a large number of people to vote a different way in one of the next elections. Another way of saying this, in the marketplace, I can change my mind tomorrow. Yesterday, I wanted to eat Cheerios for breakfast. Today, I want hot cereal. Or I want bacon and eggs. Or I want no breakfast at all. I can go to the market and buy other goods that I want, even if your tastes say the same or change in different ways. So one can change one's preferences and act upon them in almost a continuous basis. Okay? And I don't have to get anybody else's agreement. I liked Cheerios yesterday. Today I go back to the store and I buy the ham and eggs. I don't have to get anybody's consent as long as I'm willing to pay for the goods at the checkout counter. In the political arena, I can't do this. I'm stuck with the decision until the next election. If it's a president, 4 years, a senator, 6 years, a member of the House of Representatives, 2 years, for example. And even if I don't like something that they've done and I want to, quote, throw the bums out, I can't unless I get enough of you to agree with me that the bums need removal, so that on election day there is a sufficient of us that we outnumber those who like the bums. Of course, bums is in the eyes of the beholder, right? That's the difference in the political process. It's infrequent, the infrequency of elections. It requires mutual agreement of changing the personnel and what they're going to do. And once that decision is made, it's imposed upon the rest of the society, majority rule. Unlike the pluralistic, more individual and continuous decision-makings of the members of a free society, a market economy. Okay. People confuse democracy with freedom and therefore too easily accept majority decisions that may limit or even abolish the liberty of the individual. Dr. Cox said also, trying to make some extreme example, what if the majority voted to kill the minority? What if the majority voted to enslave the minority? What if the majority chose to impose a compulsory payment of tribute, euphemistically referred to as taxes, on a minority? Most of us, at least for some of that, would immediately be shocked. What do you mean? Just because 51% doesn't like the 49%, they can't kill the 49%, or they can't make the 49% slaves. Why? Why? If voting is freedom, then why can't the majority in the vote do whatever they want? But that implies, our reluctance to accept that implies in each and every one of our minds that we believe that there must be some limits on what others can do to their neighbors, even if that group represents a majority, in principle, even a majority of 99 against 1. Indeed, that is what the purpose of the Bill of Rights in our Constitution is about. The First Amendment to the Constitution says, Congress may pass no law. Congress may pass no law. Against what? Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. This is saying that there are certain rights the individual possesses. He owns them, that may not be taken away by no matter how large a majority, even if they don't like what he writes, even if they don't like what he says, even if they don't like the religion he practices, even if he doesn't like the assemblies and associations he forms with others. That's his right of owning himself and his free association with others. Okay? That's the presumption that there are limits on the power of the government. Yes, democracy determines the rules by which people will hold political office, but it requires a political philosophy to determine what you view as the role and functions of government. Today, there are no limits on government. Oh, obviously, I'm exaggerating. Most of us do have wide ranges of freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. But the fact is, constantly, legislatures at the state level, city councils at the municipal level, the Congress at the federal level, pass laws, legislations, regulations, dramatically influencing and narrowing increasingly the freedoms of our fellow citizens, of ourselves. Some of you know that there's this fellow named Ron Paul who's been running in the Republican primaries against the leader now, Mitt Romney. I've known Ron Paul for many years, and I asked him once, when you first entered Congress, which he did and has served as a representative from a district in Texas, when you first entered Congress, what did you discover that surprised you the most? And what Ron Paul told me, he says, the realization that if I stand in the well of the House of Representatives and I'm giving a talk, a speech, right, before my other fellow congressmen, there's two arguments that if I use them, they will laugh at me and not take me seriously. And what are those two arguments, Ron Paul told me? It's unconstitutional, it's immoral. Those arguments have no weight. Because obviously the vast majority of the people in Congress believe that they're gods. Their vote dictate the rules by which everyone else will live and have to obey. Maybe some of you remember when President Obama's health legislation, what's called Obamacare, passed a couple of years ago. A reporter asked Nancy Pelosi, who was then Speaker of the House of Representatives, did she feel that there were any constitutional limits on the passage of this legislation? To which she replied in the camera, "Are you joking?" That's because she can't imagine that there's anything that she can't do as a member of the government. We voted on it, we control, you do what we say, that's life. And how do they rule? By forming coalitions of special interest groups who have sufficient majorities on election day to get elected those who are running for office and want power. And what is traded is other people's money. You elect me, and I will tax or regulate others to serve your special interest purposes. If freedom is to grow in the 21st century, each of us must learn the meaning of liberty. Why freedom is important. Don't you want to be self-owning? Don't you want to set your own purposes, goals, and meanings for your life? Don't you want to determine what you do, how you do, where you do, for what you do, as long as you do it by those same rules of the game with blind justice? You don't kill, you don't steal, you don't defraud. And resist the temptation of using the government to get what you want. It's very easy to turn to a politician who's trying to pander to you and say, tell you what I'm going to do. You elect me and I will give you free health care. I'll give you free retirement. I'll give you free housing. I'll give you unemployment. I'll give you this. I'll give you that. Who doesn't like something for free? But it's not free. It's not free because someone else has to be taxed for you to be given it, and someone else's freedom must be abridged for you to have the privilege of government giving you something that they have to pay for or provide. So what we need to do is we must practice in the political arena what we all know to be true in the private affairs of life. Don't kill, don't steal, and don't cheat others. The golden rule. And those simple things that hopefully most of us had taught to us when we were little kids. Johnny, that belongs to Bobby's. That's Bobby's toy. Well, that's important. And not stealing Bobby's toy just because you, Johnny, wants it should be what guides us in our political philosophy as well. Because if we don't, we will have a society of plunder, control, and threatened tyranny. If we resist that, we can have a society of dignity and respect and freedom for every individual, and the gains from the trade of each being free to use their own minds as they see best for our mutual improvement and gain, for all of us to have a better and more prosperous and freer society. Thank you very much. Okay. Dr. Matchek, do we have some time for questions?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Damn it, I was trying to avoid the questions. Talk longer, talk longer. I left time. Okay. Any questions, comments, banana peels, rotten tomatoes? Come on, you know. I'm used to it. I have a wife. Oh.
How did you manage to learn how to use PowerPoint within 1 week?
This young man here has been taking me for a course on economics and public policy, which obviously covers quite a bit of this. He can tell you that I use the old-fashioned way. I write a lot on the board, right? And suddenly, it's a miracle! It's a miracle!
Would you be willing to make this PowerPoint available to the students?
Well, for a price.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. Of course, no problem. No problem. No problem. Any other comments or questions? All makes sense? All seems reasonable?
I had a lot of questions, but let me limit it to a big question. I don't know how long it's going to take you to answer it.
Sure.
In the history of the philosophy of liberty, I think you've outlined the early developments as the opposite of slavery.
Right.
But the purposes of many people who argued in favor of individual liberty were to free the individual to direct their own life and so forth. But many were frustrated with the results of that and developed this notion of positive liberty.
Right.
The idea that the outcome of a purely self-ownership form of liberty was not justified. Good example of this might be the rape example you used. If a woman is impoverished and has no opportunities, she might agree to make herself available to a man who is wealthy enough to support her, and that is also a kind of violation of her dignity. So this idea of positive freedom as having the resources available to live a fully human life, where does that fit into your philosophy?
It doesn't. For the simple reason is that if you take a view that liberty is the power to be able to do things that you want to do. I have to get back over here. If you define freedom or liberty as the having the power to do things that you want, you have to ask yourself the question, from where and from whom comes that power? The poor person says, but my choices are narrowed because I don't have enough income to buy the things that I would desire, for instance. I have to accept or enter into associations or relationships or transactions that if I was in a different position, I wouldn't, which I have to now. Well, that's true. I'm put in the frustrating position that Northwood University won't pay me $1 million a year. I think I'm worth $1 million a year. My knowledge, my skills, my experience, and so on and so on. But you know what? I can't tell Northwood University, I want $1 million or I'm not going to work for you. Because guess what Northwood University is going to tell me? There's the door. There's the door. And why do I need $1 million? Because my wife, we have a lot of family needs for that. Some students who have had me know that I'm always making fun of my wife. I love my wife, but I just do this as a joke. Right, cameras, no microphones. Okay. So, but the point is that you have to ask yourself, is that, you see, the liberty that I'm talking about is called negative freedom. The individual is allowed to do anything that he wants as long as he does not violate the equivalent rights of another. I can pursue any purpose I want. I may go anywhere I desire. I may attempt to achieve anything that I value, as long as in the process of doing that, I do not violate the other individual's right to his life and liberty and his honestly acquired property to pursue the goals and purposes and avenues that he finds attractive. The positive notion of liberty says that I am not really free unless I have the power to achieve the goals that I want, which basically means material wealth, material resources. Well, if your own labor cannot produce it, or you cannot acquire it through the exchanges of the marketplace, from whence is it to come? What is usually meant in this context, that it is to be taken from others. Now, you must believe that there is a moral right of government to take what others have honestly earned and produced and redistribute it to others. Now, there's a problem here. And that problem is well, several. First, if a person believes that a part of the wealth that he's going to produce will then be taxed away and redistributed to others without his consent, what happens to his motive or incentive to be as productive and wealth generating? I think a little thought would suggest that at least for some, if not many in society, that would reduce their motive and incentive, since the harder I work, the less I get to keep. So why should I work so hard? But the other one is a moral issue. If a person has honestly, that is no fraud, no violence, no theft, has honestly earned what he has, and if he does not voluntarily consent to have his wealth taken from him by the government to redistribute it to another, do you believe that the government has a right to take his wealth by force? Now, what does that mean? It means that the individual will be compelled to give up a portion of his wealth for redistributive purposes. What if he says no? What if he says no? Do you believe that the government has the right to arrest and imprison him so part or all of his wealth may be taken and redistributed to another? So do you believe that he may be taken away in chains so the wealth that he has produced can be distributed to another? Let's take that further. What if he resists arrest? I've honestly worked for every dollar that I've earned. I've never lied, I've never cheated, I've never stolen, I've never killed. I've dealt honestly and above board with every person with whom I interacted in the marketplace, and every dollar I've earned has been based upon free, mutually agreed upon exchange and consent. I've cheated nobody. I've stolen from nobody. And I don't want you to take my wealth. Sir, I'm arresting you because you've not paid your taxes. I am a free man, and I'm not guilty of anything. I'm not going with you. In principle, if that person resists arrest, and believe me, if you resist paying your taxes long enough, the IRS with U.S. Marshals will show up at your door. They will want to seize your house for back taxes. They'll garnish your salary. They'll take your savings accounts. And if you attempt to resist your house being taken, or your salary garnished, or your savings accounts confiscated, they will arrest you for violation and interfering with their lawful duties as they define them. And then if you continue to resist, the U.S. Marshal does have the authority to pull out his firearm to subdue and prevent you from continuing to resist him taking, on behalf of the government, your property. And if you resist long enough, under certain circumstances, he has the right to use that weapon up to lethal force, and therefore to kill that person for refusing to have his wealth redistributed to another. I mean, why do all of us get nervous if we get a call from the Internal Revenue Service? Because we know at the end of the day, they have the power of a gun to imprison us, or if we were to resist arrest, to use physical force to harm us, including up to death. Do you believe that to give greater wealth to some, others are to be threatened with imprisonment or even death? And do you believe that that's moral? And if you do think it's moral, what is the moral principle by which you believe another may be enslaved, imprisoned, and killed so another can have more food stamps to buy potato chips with at the supermarket? Because that's what it amounts to. Or by what moral principle do you believe that person shall be enslaved in paying taxes, or if it resists, to be arrested or even killed, so another person can go have free medical care, free in the sense of someone else's wealth paying for it? That's the bottom line. That's why all that's talked about positive rights and redistribution and social justice is all ultimately making some in the society the productive slaves of others who are to redistribute that which others have produced to other members of society that are deemed to be worthy of it. If I were to do this, if I went up to you and said, you know what, I think you have too much. Give me your wallet. And I proceed to take part or all of the money in your wallet, I think most of the people would be aghast. Well, what is this person stealing this money? It's his wallet. We presume he's earned it honestly. It's no different if I do it than if I get together and a gang robs him. And it's no different than if the gang is called voters and they hire someone to do the dirty work called policemen and tax gatherers. And it is no more moral that if he resists my taking his wallet and I accost him or injure him or kill him, than if that person who has honestly earned his money has it taken away from him by the agents of those who want that wealth in the form of the IRS and U.S. Marshals and the American political system. Theft is theft. Now, there may be a moral case for killing some so other people can have subsidized health care. I'm waiting for that moral justification. Okay, any other questions, comments?
Seeing no more questions, then thank you very much, Dr.
Thank you.
Ebeling, once